This meeting is being recorded.
And we'll begin. Welcome, everyone. My name is Marjorie O'Toole, and I'm the Executive Director of the Little Compton Historical Society. And I'm very pleased to be with you here tonight to introduce this very interesting presentation. I normally just speak extemporaneously, but I want to make sure I get things right today. So forgive me if I look like I'm reading, it's because I am. In some years, in the spring, around this time, we will offer a program that is sort of a preview of the exhibit you're going to see in the summertime. And by this point in the year, in the process, we typically know exactly what that exhibit is going to look like. We have graphics and logos and a very clear plan for what we're going to do. This year is exactly the opposite because we've done something very different. This year, tonight, the board and staff of the Historical Society are going to see proposals for the exhibit for the very first time, and you as community members are going to see them at the exact same time that we see them. And the proposals are the result of the hard work of teams of Brown University curatorial students and Rhode Island School of Design students. And they have been working since January with the direction of our board president and Brown professor Steven Lubar and Rhode Island School of Design professor Francesca Leuni. The students have visited the Historical Society and they've measured our exhibit space and our site and created some maps for us. They've studied our collection. They've researched Little Compton's transportation histories, and they've spent a great deal of time thinking about what an exhibit called Little Compton Connected should include. Tonight, they'll share their proposals with us. We can think of it as a gentle pitch meeting between an up-and-coming exhibit design firm and their Historical Society client. We need to keep in mind, though, that the Historical Society client is getting all these wonderful suggestions for free, and that these are students, and we want to be supportive of them in their learning process. Over the course of the next few days, we, the Historical Society, will select which of the proposals or which portions of different proposals we would actually like to include in the exhibit. And the students are going to continue working, I believe, for three more weeks on this project. And here's the really fun part. Your opinion, you as viewers and participants in this meeting, your opinion matters too as well. There will be a question and answer section at Steve, did you want to do it just at the end, or do you want to do it at the end of each of the four?
A question or two at the end of each section would be good.
Okay. So you're going to have four proposals presented to you this evening. At the end of each of those four proposals, we'll reserve time for one or two questions, which Christine will read from the chat for us. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for lots of questions, including those that you might have typed in earlier and we didn't get to during the brief question and answer period at the end of each section. So we can gather more information tonight. And then we invite you to send me an email by noontime tomorrow to express your opinions, what you liked, what you would have liked to have seen more of. Let us know. My email is lchistory@littlecompton.org, and I'm going to ask Christine to type that into the chat so that everyone will have it handy. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Board President Steve Lubar, Brown University History Professor Steve Lubar, and he'll take it away.
Thank you, Marjorie. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for both an experiment and what I hope will be a really interesting opportunity to see some behind the scenes of exhibit work and some really wonderful ideas about what we might do for this exhibit. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see the screen that says coming soon?
Yeah.
Great. So as many of you know, every year the Historical Society takes on a new exhibit project. And there's lots of board discussion about how to select what to do. We usually think 2 to 3 years ahead. The topic for this year, as Marjorie's mentioned, is transportation in Little Compton Connected. I'm not actually sure I remember how we picked that topic. There's not a particular anniversary that we're celebrating. Next year, on the 350th anniversary of the town, we'll be doing an exhibition on the Sakonets people. The following year, on the 250th anniversary of the Revolution, an exhibit on the Revolution. But this year, transportation, a good and important topic. It's also a very big topic. And I think the students, I know I've been surprised, and I think my students have been too, as how many stories one might tell about transportation in Little Compton. We've got 12,000 years of history to talk about in Little Compton. We have people coming into Little Compton. We have people leaving Little Compton. We have people moving around Little Compton by water, from mishuns, native canoes, to ferries, to sailboats, to steamboats, land. You'll see, of course, walking carriages, wagons, automobiles. You might be surprised to see trains and trolleys crossed out, but one of the things we've learned is that there were plans to build a train line to Sakonnet Point and trolleys throughout the town at the turn of the 20th century. There's infrastructure, roads, of course, but also the piers and the docks and the lighthouses. And there's transportation for serious work of getting around and play. Lots of ways people play with transportation technologies, boats and cars and everything else. There's also, as the students discovered as they started to think about this, so many different ways to organize an exhibit. People, ideas, goods, there's lots of ways to think about how do you pick the stories to tell. And so you'll see 4 different examples of the ways in which balance between all of these great stories have been told. How to pick the stories, the students in the class will know this is a little bit of a reminder of what we've talked about for the semester, but it's a combination of what's important, what's interesting, what you've got good objects for, what stories are fun, what images have you got that really tell great stories, make the point that you want to make. So the students have really immersed themselves in the project of figuring out what's important, what's interesting, and how to tell those stories. A little bit about the way this was set up. There are, as Marjorie said, a group of RISD students, most of them in the program, the graduate program in exhibition and narrative environments. And students at Brown are both graduate students and undergraduate students in a whole range of fields. That went into 4 groups, and you'll see here a presentation from each of those groups. But there's also been a lot of work at the Historical Society. Marjorie, of course, is always keeping an eye on us and keeping us on track. Christine is helping, especially with the programs and access to the collections. Fred has been great in collections and research questions. And there's a committee of the board, Fred Bridge, Helen Richmond-Webb, Charlie Truslow, and George Kilburn, who have met occasionally and will be meeting again tomorrow to think this all over. So what we'll have today is we'll hear from the curators on each team talking about their project. It's a pitch, but it's a soft pitch. It's not really a competition. I liked what Marjorie said about it being a gentle pitch meeting. We'll take the best of all these ideas and work together with all the students, both at Brown and RISD, to turn them into a final exhibit project. So 4 presentations, 1 or 2 questions after each. Put the questions into the chat, and Christine will choose some for us. And then at the end, Christine will talk a little bit about some of the programs that we're thinking about to accompany the exhibit. One last slide here, just sort of show you where we are in the process. Exhibits are long, complicated projects. We've done the research, a lot of the research. We've figured out what the point is each of the teams has. And we're sort of at the point now of concept design or schematic design. This is the point where you make big decisions about what happens. And over the next 2 or 3 months, we will be finishing this up to open early July. So with that, group 1, I'll introduce Carolyn Lau and Luigi Claude. And I think you can unmute yourself, but just let me know if it's a problem. And you're on.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. If you could just move to the next slide for me. So I'm Carolyn. I am a co-curator for Group 1, and I'm going to introduce our exhibit plan. I just wanted to express gratitude for the amazing RISD designers first. So Vivian, Minnie, Caitlin, and Sol, who also designed the amazing accompanying exhibit logo on the right-hand side of the slide. They'll be chiming in a little bit later to talk about the design portion of the exhibit. So our exhibit explores the ways that changing forms of transportation have connected the town of Little Compton on a local, regional, and even international scale. These connections contribute to Little Compton's town identity. So Luigi and I have developed 4 key themes to delve into our big idea. The first being people, community, and identity. The second, circulation of goods and ideas. The third, landscape and development. And the fourth being leisure. In our exhibit, you'll discover how these transportation connections have influenced Little Compton's agriculture, tourism, community life, and sense of place. From carriages to automobiles, steamships to sailboats, these revolutions have transformed how residents and visitors experience and perceive this small but globally connected community. If you could just go to the next slide for me. Thank you. So people, community, and identity is our first and central thematic section of the exhibit. Here we highlight how people make Little Compton the town it is today, how and why those people came here for a weekend, for a summer, for a lifetime, has been influenced by larger changes in the economy throughout the country and the world. Little Compton shifts from a slave-based agricultural economy to an industrialized and finally post-industrialized economy shaped ideas about what it means to be from the town and to be a part of its community. We want visitors to engage with these questions. There's something they're probably familiar with: street signs. These handmade signs that lack standardization are visual indicators of how unique Little Compton's town identity is. We include an interactive activity where visitors can make their own street signs. Folks can take them home, contribute to a living display of everyone's signs within the exhibit, or even place them around town. And for the remaining 3 thematic sections, I'm going to actually pass it to my co-curator now, Luigi.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. I'm Luigi. I'm the curator for Group 1. For our second section, the circulation of goods and ideas is displayed through a model of an early 20th century general store. So visitors can come in contact with goods like bags of chicken feed or cans of coffee, as well as ideas like letters or magazines from the post office. People in Little Compton were connected to people and companies far and wide because of their purchases and personal connections. Transportation is what made these relationships possible, and visitors can see how it affected residents' day-to-day lives through the material context of a general store. Our third section is about the landscape and development of Little Compton. This section details the ways the people altered or planned to alter the land around them to suit their needs. These acts, such as the creation of roads by native Seconic people, the later modification of these roads for property, plans for rail access into town, and contemporary restrictions on beach access, shaped the story of Little Compton's transition from an agricultural town to a commuter suburb. And our section on leisure pays homage to all the ways people of all ages had fun. Our first three sections that we just described are heavily tied to work in the economy, and we wanted to include a perspective that shows how transportation wasn't just a means to an end. It could also be enjoyed without any greater purpose. So toy cars, bikes, buggies, sailboats, they kind of speak to transportation as recreation. Moreover, the section will include steamships and summer beachgoers, highlighting Little Compton's continued status as a beach town and vacation destination. And now we'll move to the next slide, please. And I'll pass it over to our team of RISD designers to talk about how the themes that Carolyn and I just explored a little bit and these ideas have transformed into an actual design for the space.
Right, thank you, Carolyn and Luigi. My name is Minnie, and I'll be presenting on behalf of my team, who are on the Zoom right now, but I'll be speaking for them. So I'll briefly go over our main design concept, which has evolved from the idea of recreating an environment. We want to echo the concept of transportation through the idea of how objects have been transported, and transportation through container boxes and stacking up of these boxes, and mimicking the spaces of the original usage of objects. So from that, I'll go into our floor plan and zoning. So as Carolyn and Luigi mentioned, our main exhibition space will house our biggest concept, which are of people, community identity, landscape and environment, and also our leisure section, which these three are kind of interconnected in a way through people, community, and identity. So we chose to put them in the middle of the main exhibition space, where the street sign activity will also be happening in that bigger zone. And because the shallower architecture of the barn itself creates like this perfect little nook for the recreation of a reimagined general store. So we want to continue the idea of recreating an environment under the loft in that smaller space. So in summary, the curation and the architecture kind of dictates where we choose to place our zonings and choose to place our objects. These will be a lot clearer in the render images that will be in the later slides. But now I'll be talking about the visual display system that we want to propose. So we want to create this new visual language through the use of color coding systems, illustrations, and new materials. We wanted to bring in vibrancy and color and also fun into the space. So because we have 4 zones, we have a color coding system for each zone that will be both in the intro panels, in our modular box system, and also in our display panels. So we have a color coding system for each zone, and those similar colors will also be on the modular wooden boxes that will be housing our objects. And the sizes will vary from size small, medium to large, and these will be statistically calculated in order to fit all of our objects on top. And because we wanted to mimic the way that transportation in terms of like steamboats, whether it's on cars, we wanted to stack the boxes up, kind of play around with the angles, shift them a little bit so it kind of mimics that transportation theme and the idea of how it shapes the identity as well. So we also wanted to propose the newer wooden panels and wood in all of our new addition, because we wanted it to be the same material as the current structure of the barn right now, but in a more modern and contemporary style. And also because it is a continuation of the idea of wooden signs. So there's kind of like this echo in use of material and use of color with like throughout the entire space. Maybe you could go to the next slide for me, please. So in this axonometric drawing, I think it's a lot more clear in terms of how color is used in terms of zoning and how the boxes will be stacked up and how the colors help differentiate each zone as well. And then lastly, we'll be going through our renders, which can you go to the next slide for me, please? So the next 4 renders will be pretty much a walkthrough of what it would look like if you enter into the space. So starting from the entrance looking in to the barn itself is where you will enter into our intro panel, and then it'll be briefly talking about the exhibition and the curatorial statement. And we wanted to keep the display panels that will be displaying the two-dimensional objects pretty small, because we noticed that the structure of the space itself is already pretty breathable. So we wanted to keep the openings in the space as kind of like this visual continuity. So when you're in one zone, you will always see another section of another zone. So you can see it in the colors and you can see it in the objects as well. You can, if you can go to the next slide for me, please. So this will be our general store, which is the recreation for the circulation of goods and ideas space. So we wanted to kind of mimic the general store by displaying the actual objects on the display boxes, but then we wanted to recreate these objects as if they were to be in the stores as references from photographs that were given from Carolyn and Luigi. Kind of whether we want to recreate these mock-ups of these objects, or we want to kind of print them out and stick it on the wall. It's kind of, there are many ways of going about it, but it's just kind of creating this atmosphere as if you were to be in the space itself. And then next slide, please. And then our leisure section. And then next will be our entire space. So you can see that we're like peeking in and out through the different colors and different zones. So that's what we have for you today. Thank you for listening to our proposal.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. They're beautiful drawings.
Thank you.
Christine, have we got any questions in the chat? Any discussions?
I don't see anything yet. I'll second your comment though, Steve. The graphics are great. The content looks amazing. And I love the idea of the general store in there. I think it's awesome.
Great. Very good. Again, if you have comments, put them in the chat for Christine, and we'll get to them at the end. So okay to move on to group 2. Okay, group 2, Colby and Christina.
Hi, everybody. My name's Colby. I'm one of the co-curators. And I will go ahead and start us out today. If Christina, you want to introduce yourself, and Roxy as well. I believe you're here. I just want to say hey real quick.
Hello, I'm Christina Miles.
Either way, I don't know if Roxy's heard me. We can go ahead and go ahead and start with the next slide. So hey everybody, thank you for having us. Christina and myself and Roxy and Ying and Shooting, our RISD designers, have been working tooth and nail, getting something prepared for you all, getting all the right things out here. So our exhibit, Little Compton Connected, as it has been named, starts out with a chronological history of the town of Little Compton. It's a chronological exhibit. And so we want kind of the big takeaway of this exhibit, our big idea rather, to look at how Little Comptoners changed the way they use transportation to connect with each other, but also with the outside world through the movement of goods, ideas, and people. So thinking about that, we really wanted to create a space that would look at history in some unique ways. It's basically an exhibit that you kind of flow throughout almost. You look at the walls and you sort of have a chronological view of history as you're walking through. But transportation in Little Compton has always been a very key part of its history, but it hasn't ever stayed the same. Funny fact. The footpaths initially made by the native Sakonnet tribe became roads paved by first English settlers. Automobiles began taking place of carriages. But throughout the town's history, transportation has always been a way to not only move goods and people, but also to transport ideas in and outside of the town. Little Comptoners have always been connected to the outside world and have played key roles in social movements at the time within the town and in the greater world. In the 18th century, abolitionist papers were distributed across the city, and in the 19th century, Little Compton women sent letters to each other to organize for women's suffrage. In this exhibit, we follow the many trails, hoping to be exhibited by Little Compton residents, and hope that you guys can begin to meet some of the visitors of the past. So we have 6 main sections for our exhibit. And how this is working is, I'm not sure if, Roxy, are you in the Zoom and can you hear me?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
here.
Perfect. So first thing I'm going to do is just name all of our sections real quick. So one of our first sections is titled Native History and Colonial Legacies. It's at the bottom right if you want to look. There you go. Native History and Colonial Legacies. And then next, right next to it to the left, we start out with Summering Traditions. And then to the left, we again talk about some road development and how transportation has changed. Going into businesses and exports right above that. And home delivery systems, which I'm so excited to talk about. But also to the right of that, how women and ideas flowed throughout the town, changing the landscape of the town. So if Roxy, if you want to go a little bit into the design process.
Yes, so like, because based on our curator's idea, most of our collections is like two-dimensional. It's like posters or like some texts, and also we have some like 3D objects as well. So like when it comes to the design, we're thinking about like how can we make the posters and the texts to be like more intriguing for the audience. So we thought to design a systems that can apply to all the collections. So if you can look at the middle columns in the very bottom, we have 6 modules in total, and these modules are made from the plywoods, which are very cost efficient, and also we used very bold gestures, and they're very geometry, and the color is kind of like a baby blue color. So like the system we design is very modern, and we want it to be kind of like vivid to contrast to the very like old-fashioned and wooden interior of this space, and sort of like to light up the interior a little bit as well. So like by connecting these modules in different ways, it can be used for different usage. So if you look at the diagrams in the middle column at above the things, you can see that these modules are able to host like different size of posters, different size of 3D objects, but it can also be used as settings or like for some event as well. If you want, like you can turn it into a table or a seating or like an exhibition shelf as well. So they're very multi-functions in terms of their usage, and they can be like adapt to different usage as well. So yeah, that's basically our design ideas, and we also have some like renderings at the very bottom of the left corner, which shows like how we envision this interior will be, and which corresponds to our creator's idea. So basically our main focus is to make a system that can be flexible to adapt to different usage, and also it can be like very cost efficient. So, and also like easy to manufacture. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. And on the next slide, we actually have those renderings blown up. If people, I think that'd be good. So you, as you can see, like Roxy said, a very modern design. And we plan to incorporate the space for seating, interaction with different objects as well. So yeah, we can go ahead and go to the next slide.
Awesome. I'm going to talk about our first 3 sections. And so our goal for the exhibit is to not only cover thousands of years of Little Compton history and how transportation has played a major role in that history, but also do so effectively and do so in a way that's accessible. So our first room that you can see highlighted with that circle, the circle that says 1, talking about Native history and colonial legacies, focusing specifically on early forms of transportation in Little Compton, and then getting into some of the colonial land development plans that you can see in old maps. We really want to focus on the fact that before English settlers even got here, the Seconic people were already creating vast trade networks with indigenous people nearby in Rhode Island and possibly very far away to even the Great Lakes. So this copper point you see on the right to the first bullet point is currently undergoing some testing by the Half American Museum to decipher where it's from and what time period it's from. And if it dates back to the early Archaic period, which is thousands and thousands of years ago, like we believe, it's evidence of the fact that Seconic people, not only were they walking along footpaths to trade with the Poconoet people through the Poconoet Road, the Narragansett people, and other Wampanoag branches, but they were also using perhaps waterways and land travel to trade with the ancestors of the Algonquin tribes up in the Great Lakes region. So even before settler colonists get here, we see these vast trade networks that require people to move and require forms of transportation, such as Mishunash or Mishunuk, which are dugout canoes that we actually will have a live model that will be in front of the exhibit. So also tying in some of the things that will be happening and some events that will be happening down the line in October. And these footpaths would eventually be paved over by settler colonialists to create early colonial road systems. And these colonial road systems are maintained today in the infrastructure of Little Compton. Old Main Road or West Main Road, however you refer to it for your own personal sake, was actually present in maps as early as 1774. And it became the primary way that settler colonists got in and out of Little Compton to trade with the other 13 colonies. And not only did trade happen domestically, but it also happened across the Atlantic. Little Compton was connected to the transatlantic slave trade, utilized ships that were traveling the Atlantic to bring back goods, both from Europe, from the Caribbean, to push out goods from the Caribbean, as well as to transport enslaved people to work the early agricultural farms. And so we want to approach transportation not only as something that helps people move around Little Compton, but connects them to the world and economies outside of it. And then our second section is on summering traditions. Summer people, quotations, whether you like it there or not, were really important aspects of Little Compton history. The summer economy not only changed the way that businesses were run in Little Compton, but the way transportation works. So we wanted here to focus on the Seconic Steam Company and all of its steamliners that would actually bring people in from Providence and New York to dock right at Seconic Point or Warren's Point, in which they could walk just 4 minutes to hotels. So we want to talk about the fact that not only were people outside of Little Compton coming in on these steamboats, but we also saw that there were Little Comptoners who were taking steamliners, steamboats and cruise liners away to far off places. The suitcase you actually see to the right was owned by a veteran who lived in Little Compton during the 1910s, and he took this briefcase with him all the way to a tour of Europe on a London cruise liner. So we also wanted to focus on the fact that not only are summer people coming into Little Compton, Little Comptoners are going out to have fun themselves during the summer. This is where we would also highlight the different leisure and attractions that drew people into Little Compton, where we could highlight the fact that fishing and sports hunting were a big aspect of the early summer economy, as well as the ways that people from the outside of Little Compton got in through automobiles towards the end of the 19th century. And then our third section is about the development plans in Little Comptons, those that did come into fruition and those that didn't. One thing that we found was really lovely, just interesting, that Professor Lubar hinted at in the beginning, was that there were all these amazing plans to create these huge railroads and electric railways, and then they never happened for whatever reason. So this section of the exhibit would talk about the forms of public transport that did come into fruition, like the picture of the jitney bus, which is on the right here, and the different school buses that actually brought children of Little Compton around the area. And the jitney served the south coast of Little Compton, I believe, as compared to the forms of public transport that didn't take. And the way that these forms of transport were not only tied to the tourist economies, creating these railroads and electric railways so that people could come in and move around, but what it told us about whether or not Little Comptoners wanted public transportation, such as railroads, and how that would change our environment. So we want to use this section to really get viewers and visitors to imagine what transportation in Little Compton would have looked like had these things happened or not. Next slide.
Okay. And not too much longer for your time.
No, yeah. This is our very last slide. So 4, 5, and 6, we kind of get into a little bit more of the more contemporary turn of the century into 1900s. So first, section 4, we have Little Compton's businesses and exports. As many have talked about, it's agricultural based on dairy farming, different wheat production. We have actually bills of sales from the late 1700s where they sold 56,000 pounds of barley. But to the right here, we actually have a letter from FWC Almy, basically advertising his prized Rhode Island red hens, which are central to the area of Little Compton. And we actually plan to, make a little special case for that. So we really do want to highlight some of the families that were involved, specifically Portuguese immigrants who came to Little Compton and helped dairy farms and different family-owned farms running. But also in home delivery, we want to talk about how different businesses like those went directly to the homes, like the C.R. Wilbur store, using horse and buggy, eventually to motor vehicles, staging a living kitchen so we can show goods and all of those things. And lastly, in our section, we want to include women and ideas on the move. We have some really cool diaries from Sarah Sewell Wilbur, who was an early suffragette in the town of Little Compton, brought many people to the town to speak and incorporate those ideas. But we also have interactive oral histories from people like Ida Wilbur Smith, that we plan to include. Also Elizabeth Lizzie Manchester, if anybody here recalls that name or has any stories about that, we'd love to use those. Also how Portuguese women changed the town, and different ideas of abolition and slavery. Sorry for the long-winded answer. We are very passionate and very knowledgeable now about Little Compton, and we are so thankful that you all listen to us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you all three of you for that presentation. Lots of good stories there. So group 3, Ellen Huggins and Thomas Creighton are the curators, and I'll let them do the introductions.
Great. Hi, I'm Ellen Huggins, and I've been working with Thomas on this exhibit. The name of our version is Navigating, in parentheses, Your Little Compton, and it's really based on like individual stories. And I will say as well that we've had some miscommunications with our designers, and which isn't anyone's fault. It's just like a big learning curve in terms of like collaboration and timing. So a lot of the designs you'll be seeing are actually drawn by me. So hopefully you give me some grace with that, because I'm not I'm not like an artist at heart, but please use your imagination. And if you have any clarifying questions about the diagrams, just please let me know. Okay, so next slide. All right, so our exhibition considers the connections between Little Compton and the world as told through the stories of individuals. So when we began creating this exhibit as a class, we spoke a lot at the beginning about like the big stories of transportation that we wanted to cover, like Little Compton's role in the slave trade, or how Portuguese immigrants ended up in Little Compton, and these sort of like big ideas. But as Thomas and I got to creating our own version of the exhibit, we found that we had been forgetting about how these big stories are actually made up of 1,000 slightly smaller stories packed together through time, in which everyday people are making everyday decisions. So our version of the exhibit aims to highlight the narratives of everyday people of the past and present that make up Little Compton's transportation story. And this includes you all as well as modern day residents, and we hope that you'll be able to contribute your own perspectives on transportation in Little Compton to our final exhibit. All right, next slide.
Hi, I'm I'm Thomas, the other co-creator, the co-curator of this exhibit, of this plan. And so the first section of the exhibit is about the navigational origins of Little Compton. So on one side of the exhibit, we have our section on native pathways, which features a map of land and water routes taken by the Sakonnet, the tribe whose ancestral homeland currently contains Little Compton. And so this section explains the traditional Sakonnet methods of getting around both the local region and interacting with other local tribes such as the Narragansett, and exploring connections between the Sakonnet and much further trade networks. So our main question for this region is, how did the Sakonnet people navigate the region before the official borders of Little Compton were drawn? And this is another a concept that we'll explore further in section 3. So if you go on to the next slide. The other part of this section, this would all be in the first room. So if you look at this drawing on the wall, this would be the other side of the wall. We have a selection of maps depicting Little Compton from a variety of perspectives from the colonial period. We hope to include a world map of where the colonizers of Little Compton came from, as well as a map of the triangle trade's connection to Little Compton, bringing enslaved people onto farms in town as well. So on the left here, in the middle here, is one of the earliest maps of Little Compton, and is marked with parcels of land that different people owned. We plan on annotating this map with some of the original landowners' names, as well as other people who lived in these sections of land and their stories. One such person is Sue Cotamonk, who is a Sakonnet woman who, while her name isn't specifically featured on this map. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you can see, this map in the middle has parcels of land, and in each little section there's a person's name who owned the land at this time. And so Sue Cotamonk was a Sakonnet woman whose name very explicitly is not on this map, but we know that she, in the year 1700, purchased a section of land, and we know where it is and can pinpoint it on this map. And this is notable because at this time there were a large number of Sakonnet people being pushed out of town, and so it's notable that she was buying land in town at this time. And then we plan on including other stories of different individuals whose names are on this map and aren't, and on either side of this map. And then to the right of that is another map, which is from later in Little Compton's history, 1774. And it shows the town of Little Compton using the houses and farms that became shows the houses and farms of specific people and how those became points of navigation for Little Comptoners by this time in 1774, once people were actually living on, more commonly living on this land. Settlers were more commonly living on this land. By showing these maps two maps side by side, we hope to show how Little Compton evolved from a location where people simply owned land into a place where people were part of a community and navigated using their relationships with one another for reference. For example, like someone taking a right at this person's house, or go straight when you see my neighbor's place. In section 2, we continued the thread of personal connections as a form of navigation.
Great. In section 2, we've labeled this next section Navigating Your Little Compton, Your Own Little Compton. And it's sort of like the heart of our exhibit idea. And it's based around activities in which residents and visitors are encouraged to use their imagination and draw what Little Compton looks like to them. So as visitors enter, there will be pictures of these hand-painted street signs that are currently in Little Compton. And they were actually taken by me driving down the road. I had to like jump out of the car while my mom was driving. So these are very much like in town right now. And I see their handmade quality as being incredibly unique to Little Compton. And it really highlights how human connection and care are a key part of this town's identity and actually part of its physical landscape as well. So we're considering juxtaposing these road signs to an online map version of the same road, kind of like a screenshot of what you might see on your phone while you're driving, to prompt residents to consider how navigation has changed even in the last 20 years. Like, are street signs still considered by Little Compton residents as like a way to get around? And in the spirit of these handmade signs, we're going to have an activity table at the center where we're going to encourage people to make their own street signs that are representative of where they live, either in Little Compton or beyond. And we're going to encourage people to put them up on a signpost that's located later in the exhibit. And the other activity in this room is going to be encouraging residents to draw their own version of a map of Little Compton on a postcard-sized piece of paper. And this is going to be based around what kind of routes that they take and what they see. And you might kind of see very faintly in the background of this room a needlepoint map of Little Compton that we're hoping people will be able to use as a source of inspiration, because the landmarks of this map are like a chicken or like a teepee and these kind of like odd little symbols. And we're hoping that people are going to be as creative as possible in drawing their own maps and maybe draw like 3 unusual landmarks that are significant to your everyday like transportation, like a weird tree that you pass every day, or a chicken coop, or even like a can on the side of the road. And as they leave this room, a label on the wall will ask visitors to consider, what's your experience of commuting in Little Compton, and how do you think the modern day landscape of transportation in Little Compton came to be? So next slide. In section 3, we're going to be keeping in this theme of centering individual stories of transportation, and we'll be doing research into at least 5 individual profiles of Little Compton residents over time that have interesting stories of where the routes of their lives have taken them and how Little Compton played a role in these stories. So here we hope to highlight stories that aren't often told in histories of Little Compton, such as its connection to the Underground Railroad through the story of Henry Manton, who was born enslaved in North Carolina, but traveled here alone as a child and actually settled here for the rest of his life. Or the story of Reba Peckman, who was one of only 2 women born in Little Compton to serve in World War I, but traveled all over the country as a nurse. We also hope to highlight some new perspectives within the well-known history of Little Compton transportation. So Portuguese immigration, something we've been talking about a lot, and I create a map around the story of John and Amelia Sylvia, who were just like a story I found in the archive, and how they came from the Azores Islands, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, to Little Compton, and they raised 14 children and opened a dairy farm. So yeah, just focusing on these individuals. Next slide. So this is what that might look like on the wall. As you can see, I've completed some of this research already and created maps of how these individuals came and left Little Compton, which will be featured next to these like large portraits of them to make it almost feel like they're in the room with you. So by asking the question of how Little Compton functioned as a pit stop or a final destination on the routes of these people's lives, we hope that modern day Little Compton residents will be able to reflect on their own transportation story. So what brought you or your ancestors to Little Compton? And what do you think you brought into town through the form of cultural knowledge or perspectives from other places? And down the center of the exhibit, this section of the exhibit in section 3 will be 2 glass cases, like exhibit cases down the middle, that feature transportation-related objects from Little Compton that might seem like insignificant, but were these everyday objects that people interacted with on a daily basis throughout time. So thinking of something as simple as like a tin of varnish for polishing your saddle, or like a duffel bag that you would take, or a walking stick. Like, we found all these really neat little artifacts in the archive that we hope to feature and have you consider what your transportation objects might be as well. So next slide. So wrapping up the profile side of this exhibit, we will have a section about modern day Little Compton residents. So having a driving routes map that shows the everyday routes of at least 3 different Little Compton residents that we hope to conduct an interview with beforehand, before the exhibit takes place. And we wanted to focus on driving routes and where people go on a daily basis, because we've been hearing so much about how Little Compton's very like driving centric. So we want to ask people, like, where do you go the most often? Do you go to Fall River? Do you go to Tiverton? Like, where do you go and why? And how long does it take you to get there? And we'll also have a world map that shows where at least a few individuals who call Little Compton home now, where they originally came from. And we would also gather this information through interviews with some residents who would be interested in contributing. And then on the sides, like some different stats of most common places that Little Compton residents come from, or where they travel. Yeah, so next slide. So finally, this is kind of the end cap of our exhibit. This part of the exhibit will feature a poll on which to put the street signs that people create earlier. And this is sort of mimicking the way that street signs are stacked on light poles in Little Compton already. And we'll also have a cork board here on which visitors can actually stick the hand-drawn maps that they drew earlier to this like larger cork board where people can look at other people's maps and sort of compare and contrast. And then we're also going to have this other map that's going to be like a blank one that has like Little Compton highlighted, but it's going to go all the way up to Providence and show the surrounding areas. It's going to be a blank map. And then we're going to provide push pins of different colors based on different types of transportation. So like car, walking, and bike, and then ask people, where are you going after you leave this exhibit and how are you going to get there? So leaving a pin in Providence if you're going there by car, or, you know, if you're walking home, putting a pin there. So yeah, just thinking about how these routes are constantly happening and people are constantly leaving and going, and we just really want to hear what you guys think. So thank you so much for listening.
Great. Thank you so much. Good job. Group 4, Devaney and Julie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and sticking around to the end. My name is Devaney, and I've had the pleasure of working with Julie as a co-curator and our designers, Kathy, Kavya, and Amy from the RISD team. So if you could go to the next slide. We also want to thank you just for giving us this great responsibility of representing your town history, which we've had a lot of fun exploring and digging into the archive, like the other groups have mentioned. So yeah, this has been a really great project for us to work on. So our exhibit title is Little Compton Connected, A History of Trade, Travel, and Transportation. And our big idea is over 400 years of trade, travel, and transportation have shaped Little Compton's community, connecting it to the wider world. So in our exhibit, we really want to emphasize connections and changes over time. If you could go to the next slide. Yes, so our exhibit unfolds chronologically, which highlights 5 transportation stories along the way. So if you click, the titles will come up in order just as I go through these. So if you click once, and then again, so this is the first section for the Sakonnet people's modes of transportation in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is at the bottom left corner. Our second section is focused on imports and exports exchanged through trade in the 19th and early 20th centuries, as well as local delivery services. And that's right above on the upper left corner. Section number 3 is boating, sailing, and other forms of leisure by the sea around the turn of the 20th century. That's in the bottom right corner. And then the final top right corner, at least for our big sections, is the role of automobiles in Little Compton from the 1930s to the present. And finally, our 5th section, which is a little bit smaller, but that will utilize the mezzanine that's right above the car area, is a section of children's toys. So now I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk about our first section.
Thank you, Devaney. And next slide, thank you. So the first section is about the Sakonnet people. We'll display a few Sakonnet artifacts. That will include the copper arrowhead from what we believe to be the Great Lakes region, potentially 1 or 2, because I've noticed there are quite a few axe or mallet heads that I thought were very interesting, beautifully carved. We also found a short video on crafting a machoon, and we'll have that against the wall on the right-hand side there, as well as a map of the various tribes that inhabited the region. And I think that's it. Devaney, back over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Julie. Our second section is called A Global Hearth, Goods from Near and Far. And so this will emphasize imports and exports that have come through in and out of Little Compton. So despite its modest appearance, the kitchen in any 19th and early 20th century Little Compton home represents a crossroads of global connections. So here we'll set up a 19th century kitchen to invite visitors to imagine themselves in the space, which we will fill with a wide variety of objects that have been imported from around the world. So some of these objects include, as you'll see on the slide, a tea set from Japan, a set of biscuit cutters from France, and a bobbin lace doily that was likely brought from Portugal by Portuguese immigrants or made by Portuguese immigrants in Little Compton. And so our visual here shows some pantry shelves that we might set up. We might set up a table in there, but this is focused around the domestic space. So in addition to these imported items, Little Compton also produced many exports, which were mostly agricultural goods. So this kitchen setup will include items such as eggs, barley, and potatoes, which Little Compton shipped out to the rest of Rhode Island and the broader Northeast. And then in addition to this setup, we'll have a wall panel that's next to the kitchen that will show photos of 19th century delivery wagons, 20th century trucks that delivered groceries and produce to people's homes. So we want to show the movement of goods within town. And overall in this section, we want to demonstrate how trade and the movement of goods, both local and global, impacted a wide range of Little Compton households. So back to you, Julie.
Thanks, Stephanie. So this is just to give a sense of when you're in the larger section, what you would be experiencing. So I just wanted to demonstrate that. And one small thing, the steamboat bell seems a little bit high, so that would be brought down to a level like an eye level so people could actually see it. Apologies for that. Next section. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here we really explore the leisure by the sea, and the concept was to have it feel like you're on a dock or a deck overlooking the sea. This section explores the significant impact that the sea and seashore have had on forming Little Compton. As steamboats connected Little Compton to Providence in the late 19th century, Sakonnet Point area became very popular for day trippers seeking seaside recreation. There's quite a rich history there. We have a great deal of postcards, menus, and pictures to fill up the space. We even have a soap dish with an image of the Awashonks that we'd like to display. In addition to that, there's a beautiful steamboat bell that was cast. It's a bronze bell. It was cast by the Meneelys, who were summer people. And the reason they cast the bell was because they knew the Almies, who actually owned and ran the Queen City steamboat. We'll also examine the West Island Fishing Club, which counted several U.S. presidents amongst its members, offered anglers the opportunity to pursue the region's renowned striped bass. We have photos and postcards of fishermen. And then finally, sailing and the Sakonnet Yacht Club. We have Cyrus Brownell's, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, sailing logbook from 1849 to 1853. It's quite beautifully, I mean, it's very interesting. And we have some buoys and fish hooks, and there's actually an all made in my home country of Canada, which of course I have a little bit of a soft spot for. But of course, any good sailor knows it's good to stitch some sailcloth. And we will also be using the lighthouse model, and you can see it's in the corner there as well. And that's it for my section. Back to you, Devaney.
Thanks, Julie. So our final large section is focused on cars in Little Compton. So this section follows the rise of automobiles from the early 20th century and into the present. Our featured item in this section is the 1930s Ford Model A Phaeton that will be on display in the far corner. We wanted to emphasize the way cars and paved roads have changed private transportation. And we'll discuss how bicyclists advocated for improved roads, which eventually helps car mobility, as well as the phasing out of the steamboat, which was no longer needed when cars offered cheaper and faster transportation. So while the car is the centerpiece of this section, and we hope that this will attract some visitors to the exhibit, we'll also feature a World War II poster that encouraged people to be patriotic drivers and learn their own car maintenance, as well as some ration stamps that show how gasoline was restricted during the war. So we hope that this section will give people a chance to reflect on the modern day ubiquity of cars and get a bigger picture of how cars have changed over the years. And I just want to point out, and also for our designers, feel free to jump in with some comments at the end of our sections, but I did want to point out this large scale image on the back wall. And so this is one of the themes that the designers have integrated into this exhibit, are these large scale images that draw the visitor in and make you feel like you're part of the scene.
Thanks, Devaney. And I should have pointed out that there is a large scale picture on my end as well. So the section 5, next slide, please. Thank you, is in the red square. We also plan to use the mezzanine to display several children's toys. We decided to place these on the upper level due to their delicate physical condition and to avoid any potential damage. This section is about children and transportation and how their exploration of the adult world has changed very little in the past 70 to 80 years. Toys allow children to explore the adult world through play, and this exhibit will feature 2 mobile children's toys, a charming 19th century sleigh and a 1930s pedal car that let young imagination soar. And I think that's it. You can see the large scale image on the left that I was speaking about that gives you the sense of being by the seaside. And the steamboat, there will be and I believe that's the Awashonks that will be blown up there by the bell. Yeah. And I think that's it. That's a wrap for us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Christine, have we got any questions from our audience?
Our audience has been unusually quiet tonight. Oh, I stopped my video looking at the chat. Guys,
They're all
out there, do you have any questions for these students?
If not, if you do think of ideas for us, send Marjorie a note. Her email address is in the chat. And the drawings that the students have been presenting will be on exhibit at the Historical Society the next 2 days, Thursday and Friday. And you're welcome to stop by and take a closer look. It's on many of them, the labels are written and you can get a better sense of some of the stories that are being told. So come by and take a look. And over the next few days, we'll be trying to figure out how to choose and combine and take advantage of all these great ideas and turn this into, put all the great ideas into an exhibit that fits in the space. It's always a challenge.
Steve, what time tomorrow do you think the panels will be up and ready for people to visit?
I can bring them over first thing.
I'll be there.
Which is 10 in the morning.
Okay, 10 o'clock is good.
That's great.
Were there any ferry landings, Steve and Marjorie?
Lots of ferries all along in the early days, all along the Sakonnet, because ferries over to Middletown and Newport. So there's a story there as well. And everywhere you look, there's more transportation stories.
Were there any modes of transportation built in Little Compton? Boats, automobiles, or buggies, perhaps?
Yes, there were several wagon makers in Little Compton over the course of from 1840 to 1880 or so. Wagon repair, carriage repair, and carriage makers. And we have some pretty good information about who worked there, how many carriages they made, that kind of thing. Very small scale, but there were a few. No cars, as far as I know, made in Little Compton, though. So let me go on to the last part of our session because I don't want to keep folks too long. Christine, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the programs you're thinking about?
Sure, absolutely. So some of these are ideas and, where's that poll that I need to put up? Polls and quizzes. All right, for everybody, I'm going to launch a poll, and I would love to hear what you guys think. Which of these you'd like to attend, any, all of them. So the number one here is we are going to be having a Touch-a-Truck event on our family day. For those of you who do not have small children, a Touch-a-Truck is when it's basically a car show with the assumption that the students or the kids and the adults are able to take pictures with your vehicle, sometimes sometimes go into the vehicle. We're definitely going to be having the fire department and the police department from Little Compton there. And both of those groups said that there would be touching allowed on the vehicles. We also have a 1951 Ford pickup truck that will allow you to go in and touch the vehicles. But I don't expect everybody will allow you to touch the trucks, but most people will. The second idea is definitely in the only planning stages, and we'd like to hear from you guys about whether you'd be interested in taking a trolley tour here in Little Compton along the route of what was proposed to be a trolley route in the early 1900s. I've spoken with Viking Tours. They have air-conditioned trolleys, so you won't have to worry about sweltering the summer heat. But I think it could be fun for us to have someone on the bullhorn in the front of the trolley explaining what this would have looked like for us. We heard a little bit earlier about map making, make your own map of Little Compton, whether we think should that be a standalone event or is that something that we should include in the actual exhibit. Number 4 here is definitely something that we will be having. Marjorie, is that between 2 and 4 burnings that we're going to be having?
I think there'll be 4 days that the machine will be being burned, created on our property, and the public will be welcome throughout that process.
So a very rare opportunity to see how the Sakonnet people would have created their own. For the person who asked on, were there any modes of transportation created in Little Compton? These certainly were.
Good point, Christine. Good point.
So we're going to be having a big event towards the end of our season in October, the launch of this machine at Sakonnet Point. So it'll be this huge event that we are in the beginning phases of planning, and we're really, really excited about this because it will be an opportunity for us to see how an old mode of transportation worked. We aren't going to be able to have a parade and sit in a vehicle and drive down the street, but we can see a genuine article of what it would have looked like thousands of years ago, which is really cool. We're also looking for speakers for in-person lectures or presenters for Zooms. And we'd like to know, would you guys like to hear more of these things? And we also did hear number 8 earlier, make a street sign to take home. I'd also like to propose, if you'd like your street sign to stay on the property during the exhibit and then pick it up at Site or Social so that you get to keep it, that would be really awesome too. And the last one is an idea that Marjorie and Steve sprung on me this morning. I had no idea that this was going to be happening. But we would like to know if you guys would like to participate in a soapbox derby, which would be super fun and a great way to include the whole family, the same way that we do on Family Day. So going from there, we're seeing some more chatter on our chats. Thank you from Mark Anderson. Thank you for that comment. The machine is a great tie-in to the Sakonnet Peoples exhibit. And Carol Hansen, hi Carol, I didn't see your face, but I see your question here. Where do you go? Oh, any thoughts of connecting the folks who burned or built the machine over in the East Branch of the river with WRWA film made in the process? It's the same person, isn't it?
No, it's a different person. It's a very tight-knit community. So, the Wampanoag craftsmen who make the machines all know each other and will sometimes help each other in the process. But we'll be working with Jonathan James Perry on our machine.
And Marjorie and Steve, I'm going to put you guys on the hook for this one. Which would we use for the Derby?
So, Mark, we're only going to do the Derby if someone from the community says, this is the best idea ever and I want to be in charge of it. So you might be the Derby man if you would like. You could be the Derby man if you would like. We can talk more about that.
Great.
Oh, a lot of people liked the idea, guys.
Nick Keenan had a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer. Maybe Steve does, or maybe someone in the audience does. And if you do, put it in the chat, please. And Nick wrote that in maps from about 1890 to 1940, there is a label for Quicksand Station near the southeast corner of Quicksand Pond. And any idea what kind of station it was? I don't know. The word station in Westport, it was used for a life-saving station, but I am not aware of a life-saving station with that name in Little Compton. That's interesting. We'll have to try to figure that out. And again, someone in the audience may know, and if you do, pop it in the chat, please. And if it's a complicated story, we can unmute you and let you tell the story. So Christine's going to launch the poll. And if you'll stick with us for a few minutes, you can actually you can tell us how interested you are in any of these programs, and that will help us decide where we should put our energy and our resources in the coming year.
You're also welcome to email Marjorie or I with your comments about the ideas from the poll. I'm going to put both of our emails back in the chat.
Okay, Christine, are you able to launch it?
It is now up and running.
It's up and running. Oh, maybe because I wrote it, I can't see it. That's odd, though. Do other people see the poll?
Can you guys see it? I think there's share results, relaunch poll. Oh, it only keeps it up for a couple of seconds. I don't know why.
I've seen it twice and I was able to answer the questions the second time, but it's very quick. So
this is new to me, so we're gonna figure this one out.
Okay.
Okay, I just launched it, and it looks like I get to control when it ends.
Oh, perfect.
So Fred, can you nod your head if you can see the poll? Yeah, okay, thank you.
There we go.
It's interesting though, because it's telling me that no one's responded.
I have 4 answered.
Oh, it's so odd.
If you have any ideas on any of these programs or other ideas that you'd like us to investigate, just let us know.
Yeah, that's very true.
Good. So if there aren't other questions, maybe we should bring this to an end. Marjorie, anything else we should?
Nope. Our next presentation is going to be on May 14th. In person at the community center, but we'll also try to put it on, we'll try to video it and stream it at the same time. And it's going to be an introduction to the native plant garden that we're planning, the Sakonnet History Garden that we're planning, that will be the major permanent component of our Sakonnet History Project. eventually the garden will tell the history of the Sakonnet people. It will have labeled native plants for people to enjoy. And we also believe it will have several pieces of public art made by Wampanoag sculptors and artists. So really a major undertaking. We've got some wonderful proposals for public art. We're going to be reviewing those and choosing those in the next few weeks and sharing a plan on May 14th. We have Wampanoag consultants helping us with that project, but more locally, John Gwynn of Sakonnet Garden has been very involved in the planning, and Josie Richmond Arkins has been very involved in the planning, and it's an exciting undertaking. So I'm going to end the poll, and let's see about sharing results. Now I made this poll, so I have to take responsibility for this not working, but I have 0 results. So it seems
results.
Yeah.
It looks like, will it tell me how many people? 5, okay, it does. So I think that the Machoon launch is our most popular item.
And that's good. And we'll put a lot of energy and effort into that. We
know, and that's definitely
have some Wampanoag performers. We're going to work on having some special food that day. So it'll be really quite a wonderful event. And we'll work on arranging viewing areas so that as many people as possible can come and watch the Machoon being launched at Sakonnet Point. We're not so sure yet how far it's going to travel up the river. We'll figure that out. But it's a really exciting undertaking. One reason why it's so important and I think so meaningful is that on Lloyd's Beach, which is truly Sakonnet Point, there is a rock sculpture, or a natural rock, large, that some of us call horse rock, some of us call Moshup's rock. Wampanoag people call it Squant. Squant was Moshup's wife. Moshup threw her from Aquina, from Martha's Vineyard, to Sakonnet. And there's a legend of how she lived there and interacted with the canoe paddlers as they went by. So it is a historically important, culturally important, and I don't even think I think using the word sacred is fair in this situation for Wampanoag people that right now they do not have access to if they are not with a resident of Little Compton. So this will be a wonderful opportunity to have Wampanoag people have access to that sacred site, and to it is part of the culture to offer Squant gifts before you start a canoe journey. So I think there will be ceremony at the launch, and I think it'll be a really meaningful cultural and educational experience for everyone involved. Late September, early October is what we're shooting for. And of course, it'll be very weather dependent.
Oh, it says now there's a thing for me to share results. Now can you see it? No.
I think let's give up on the poll.
Yeah,
we'll give up on the poll. I'd like to thank everybody for coming this evening, and especially to the students who did all this wonderful work.
Yes, thank them.
Pulled off these wonderful presentations.
wonderful
So thank
job.
you all very much.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.